Hey guys, welcome back for another sourdough making video. So I've been making sourdough since January of this year, 2024, and it was introduced to me by a friend at church. And if you've seen my first sourdough making video, you will know that I have zero baking experience. I like to cook. I've never really liked to bake, but that has since changed since I have learned how to bake sourdough. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm still learning as I go, but I will tell you I've had a lot of ups and downs with my sourdough experience, and I think I finally got it perfected, or at least my husband has encouraged me and made me think that I have it perfected. He told me that the sourdough loaves I've been making lately are my best yet. I've changed recipes several times, and I think I've finally found the one that works best for me. Now, I realize sourdough can be very involved. You have to have an active starter to even get started making it. And then there's a lot of stretch and folds and time that goes into it. Not everybody has time for that, including me. So to simplify it, I went online and just researched and found a lot of different recipes and did a lot of trial and error baking. And I think I've found the one that's gonna be my favorite from now on. It's working for me. I recently got a Dutch oven. I shared that in my M&K Vlogs video a couple of weeks ago. So I think that is making a difference for me as well. I'm gonna do this video in real time. I will not be doing fast motion. It's all real time, hence the lengthy video. This beautiful garlic cheddar loaf is just one of the loaves that I'm gonna be showing you today in this video. So I hope that you will stay tuned, follow along as I walk you through the steps in sourdough baking.
Besides the obvious, such as a sourdough starter, these are a few items that I find super helpful in making sourdough. They're not necessities, but they sure do make things easier. I'll have them listed in the description below with Amazon links to each item. An active and bubbly starter is really important. I did struggle with this in the beginning whenever I first started making sourdough, but I finally got my feeding ratios down and things are working out great now. I decided to do this video in real time so that in case you wanted to follow along step by step, you could just kind of watch it and work right alongside me rather than stopping and pausing, rewinding, watching all over again. I mean, you're welcome to do that with this video, but again, real time I figured would be so much easier. Here you're going to see 685 grams of water plus or minus. That's basically give or take. It's kind of trial and error. For me, all the recipes I was using before called for way too much water, and my dough was turning out soupy and my bread just did not want to rise. So I've kind of learned to play around with the water ratios, and less has worked out better for me. When I first started making sourdough, I really thought that scales were kind of silly and unnecessary, but I've really learned to love my scales. That's why I'm going a bit slower here with pouring things and all, is because I'm watching the grams on my scales. Again, they aren't a necessity. You can definitely measure by cups or using measuring spoons, but for me, the scales work out best. And grams. You definitely want to make sure you're using unbleached flour when making sourdough. That's super important. I use Kirkland's brand from Costco, and it's an all-purpose flour. You can use bread flour or all-purpose flour. When I first started, I used King Arthur brand, but then we discovered the Kirkland's brand, and it's doing just fine. I really haven't noticed much of a difference between the two. When it comes to salt, we prefer the real salt. I know some people use pink Himalayan salt or table salt, but me personally, no way. I would never use table salt in my bread. This is a Danish dough whisk. Now, I will tell you that, again, when you start out, you don't have to have these things. It's not necessary, but I, again, think that the right tools do make things so much easier. I love my Danish dough whisk, and you'll find that linked down in the description below, along with everything else you're seeing me use here today. Now, I told you that I'm using less water. That's going to make a difference on how I stir, mix, and incorporate all of my ingredients here. I don't love using my hands. Some people love to get their hands in the dough. That's not my favorite. I prefer to just mix it, but because I am using less water, it is going to require me to get in there and get my hands in the dough to really mix and incorporate all of my flour, water, and salt together. This little scraper tool is also a favorite of mine. It's great for scraping the edges of your bowl down because it has a rounded or curved edge to it, as you can see. I find this one to be super helpful. Here you'll notice that I'm adding a little bit more water, but please keep in mind that this is still within that 685 grams that I mentioned earlier. I've just had to learn as I go. I told you that my dough had been turning out soupy and it would just flatten out on me and my loaves weren't rising. So the water was definitely the cause of that. Here I am doing what I don't love, mixing and incorporating all the ingredients with my hands. Now that I've got everything mixed together, I'm just going to use that scraper and pull it all towards the center of the bowl. I'm actually going to spend a little extra time doing this because unlike most sourdough recipes, there's going to be very minimal stretch and folds required for this recipe. So now I'm just going to cover it up and let it rest for 45 minutes on my counter. Now that 45 minutes is up, I'm just going to uncover it and I'm going to grab my rounded scraper and do the same thing. Just pull the dough toward the center of the bowl and you can see that it's already a bit more pliable and has a smoother consistency to it. I'm also going to do those minimal stretch and folds that I mentioned here. And I'm just going to go around the bowl a few times, turning it, pulling it, stretching it, folding it over to the center of the bowl. I'm going to spend several minutes doing this because, like I mentioned before, this is it. This is all the stretch and folds required for this recipe. Now that I'm done, I'm just going to cover it up. You can use a damp tea towel. This is just a cover that I got at Target in the dollar spot. I'm going to allow this to sit overnight on my counter for anywhere from 9 to 12 hours. By the way, this is called bulk fermenting. Once your 9 to 12 hours is up, the bulk fermenting process, you can uncover it. You'll notice that it's puffy and bubbly. Your dough is now ready to work with. You'll want to make sure you are working on a clean countertop. I've actually already cleaned it, but I just wanted you to know for sure that my surface is clean. Now that I'm just grabbing some of my unbleached flour and sprinkling it out all over my countertop. Next, you'll grab your bowl of dough and turn it out onto your floured surface. If you're lucky, your dough will fall right out of the bowl. Sometimes I have to use my plastic scraper to give it a little extra help. Hopefully I mentioned this in the beginning, but if not, the recipe I used is for 2 loaves of bread. So if you want to just make 1 loaf, you'll need to cut my measurements in half. So now that I've got my dough out, I'm just cutting my dough in half and separating it out here and laminating it. By the way, that's a metal bench scraper that I just used. Laminating simply means stretching your dough out into a rectangle. You want to make sure that you're gentle with the dough and you don't tear it. I mean, if you do, it's not a huge deal. You can always pinch it back together, but it's best to keep it intact if possible. So this first loaf that I'm making is going to be a garlic cheese loaf. There's several ways to do this, but this is just the way I've chosen to do it. I'm using organic garlic powder and generously sprinkling it all over my dough. Next, I'm grabbing my cheese. I'm using shredded cheese today. A lot of times I'll use a block of cheese and just cut it up into little cubes. I also love to add jalapenos, but I'm out today, so no jalapenos in this loaf. Garlic, cheddar, jalapeno happens to be a family favorite. You might be wondering exactly how much garlic and cheese to use. Guys, I just measure with my heart. Next, you'll want to fold your dough over into thirds. Then add more garlic and cheese, as much as you would like here. When adding jalapeno to the bread, I usually just chop up a large fresh jalapeno or 2 small ones. It just depends on what's available. Once I get all my inclusions in there, I simply start rolling the dough up. And this is where you start forming a tight ball. Basically, you drag the dough away from you and pull it tight, and push it and pull it tight. Push and pull, folding it under, scooping it under until you form a tight ball. Just continue to pull it and shape it until you're pleased with how it looks. Sometimes it pops open a little bit and your inclusions start to pop out. Again, not a super big deal. Just pinch it back together. Now I'm just going to add some flour to the top of the dough. A lot of times I'll use rice flour here. It's not totally necessary, but it does prevent it from sticking to your Baskett basket as much. Baskett baskets are great to have, but not totally necessary. Now I'm just going to put together my second loaf. This is just going to be a plain loaf. Nothing special, no inclusions, just a plain Jane loaf of sourdough bread. I'm simply laying it out and laminating it the exact same way. And then I will fold it over into thirds, roll it up, shape it into a tight ball, pushing and pulling, forming it until I'm pleased with how it looks and feels. I'm actually going to be putting this one into a loaf Baskett basket. That's why I formed it into a more elongated shape, as you can see here. I'm just putting flour on top of it and a little extra flour in my Baskett basket to prevent it from sticking. I'm now going to cover this just like I did the other one and allow them to proof at room temperature on my counter for 45 minutes to an hour. If you're not going to be able to bake yours right away, you can go ahead and stick it in the refrigerator for a few days and bake it at any given time within a few days. Now that my 45 minutes to an hour is up, I'm going to be preheating my oven at 450. I'll also be putting my Dutch oven in there to preheat as well. Some people say do, some people say don't. I have learned that this works best for me, so you just kind of got to go with what you think is best. My double Dutch oven is only a couple of weeks old, and I am absolutely loving it. I've baked a lot of bread in it over the last few weeks. While my oven and my Dutch oven are preheating, I'm going to turn my dough out onto some parchment paper. Here's where I'll be using rice flour. I love using rice flour on the top of the bread because it prevents it from burning and it helps out whenever you're creating a pretty design. I'm just smoothing it over the top, and then I'm going to be using my bread lame to score it. You'll want to make deep cuts for your main score. This allows the bread to expand while it's rising when it's baking. And if you want to get all cutesy, you can do fun designs. I'm not very creative. I usually just do like a wheat stalk or something. Now then, I'm going to be transferring my bread on that parchment paper over into my Dutch oven. I also like to add ice cubes at this point. This helps it steam whenever it's baking. And you'll get a lot of mixed messages about this. Some people do this, some people don't. Again, this is what I've found that works best for me. Now I'm just going to place the lid or the pot, depends on the way you look at it, onto my Dutch oven and place it in the oven. I use a cookie sheet or baking sheet below it to prevent the bottom from burning. And I'm just going to bake it at 450 for 40 minutes with the lid on, as you saw. After 40 minutes, I'm going to take it back out, remove the lid, and then place it back in the oven to bake for an additional 10 minutes. You may have noticed here that my pretty wheat stalk design is showing up because of that rice flour. After that 10 minutes is up, I'm going to reach in and put some foil over the top of the bread. I've learned that at this point is where it can start burning on top. Where you've scored it and it's rising up, it creates an ear, and sometimes that does burn, so the foil helps prevent burning. All right, time is up. It's baked for 40 minutes with the lid on and a total of 20 minutes with the lid off. It's time to take it out and insert a thermometer and check the internal temp. This digital thermometer was one of the best purchases I've made yet. I always like to insert it and see my bread reach an internal temperature of 210 degrees. When I first started out, I was just using a thermometer that I had gotten at the dollar store. It was working just fine until I dropped it. I say 210, that's actually give or take a degree or two. If it's somewhere around 200, it definitely goes back in until it hits the 210-ish mark. I then take it and place it on a cooling rack, remove the parchment paper from below to prevent it from sweating, and just allow it to cool off completely. Let me tell you, this is really hard to do. It's so tempting to cut into this bread while it's still hot. It actually still bakes for a little while when cooling. Now then, I am just going to be baking this next loaf of bread. Unfortunately, I only have one Dutch oven, so I do them one at a time. It's just been sitting out, continuing to proof while the other loaf was baking. I'm going to do the exact same process, turn it out onto the parchment paper, add the rice flour, and score it. I decided to go ahead and speed this part of the video up because you don't need to hear me tell you the exact same things over and over again. I just want you guys to have fun and enjoy baking. I think I mentioned this in the beginning. Baking was never my thing until sourdough came along, and I really didn't even think I would be able to master it. And I didn't master it right away. It's taken time, but I absolutely love it. I bake anywhere from 2 to 5, maybe 6 loaves a week, and we eat it nonstop. I give it away, I share it. I don't just hog it all to myself. I mean, when it comes down to raisin almond loaf, yeah, I do try to hog that. Mike and I actually do fight over that. But anyways, now it's time to cut into this garlic cheddar loaf, slowing it back down for this process. And because I wanted to share this with you guys so quickly after baking it, it is not 100% cooled off. So crossing my fingers that it springs back up. I forgot to do the little spring test on it and show you, but I'm just slicing into it and it looks amazing. My cheese is pretty well spread out through there. Whenever I do a garlic jalapeno cheddar loaf, that's my favorite. I love seeing the jalapeno spread out through the dough. And the best part is tasting it. I'm not going to do that on camera, but I will tell you this loaf did not last long. I just pulled the regular loaf of sourdough out of the oven, and I'm going to allow it to cool and then slice right into it for you guys as well. I can't tell you enough how exciting it is whenever you make a loaf of bread to share with your friends and family. Just the satisfaction and joy that it brings me is a little bit crazy, but if you're a sourdough baker, you're going to totally understand what I mean here. I think a lot of people get caught up in how perfect their crumb looks, which is the inside of the bread. I honestly have gotten to the point where I don't care about that anymore. I just want it to taste good and fill our tummies. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share. And please let me know if you try this recipe, how it works out for you. And I hope you enjoy baking sourdough bread as much as I do. Thanks again for watching.